I woke up that Saturday to the sound of tires crunching over gravel that wasn't theirs to crunch. Through the blinds I saw the usual offender. Karen from the HOA, hair shellacked into place, lips pursed like she had been sucking lemons all night. She was standing in my driveway, hands on hips, glaring at the pile of lumber I had stacked neatly near the garage. That wood was destined to frame the small shed I'd been planning to build, but in Karen's mind, it was apparently a personal insult to her existence. I didn't even have time to sip my coffee before she rang the doorbell like she was calling a fire alarm. "Your driveway needs to be cleared immediately," she snapped when I opened the door. No greeting, no explanation, just the raw entitlement she carried around like perfume. This is a violation of HOA aesthetic standard. Vehicles need unobstructed access. I looked past her at the lumber, then at the wide, perfectly usable half of the driveway she wasn't acknowledging. "Karen," I said, calm as a monk, "my truck fits just fine. And since this is my driveway, not a public thoroughfare, I think we're good." She didn't blink. "No. The board has discussed this. It looks messy, and messy leads to property values dropping. You don't want to be the neighbor responsible for everyone's equity loss, do you?" There it was, the trump card she always played. Property values, the holy scripture of suburban Karens. I leaned on the doorframe, sipping coffee, letting the steam rise between us like a barrier. "The only thing lowering property values around here is your personality." Her jaw clenched, but she plastered on a smile like she was about to scold a child in church. "If you won't move it, I'll make a formal complaint." She pivoted like a general on parade and stomped off, nearly twisting her ankle on her own stilettos. By mid-afternoon, a printed letter appeared in my mailbox. Official HOA stationery, Karen's handwriting disguised with bold font and excessive legal jargon. It accused me of obstructing a community access point and creating a hostile aesthetic environment. I laughed so hard I nearly spilled a beer. I taped the letter to my fridge under a magnet shaped like a sheriff's star. It felt fitting. The next day, Karen escalated. She dragged 2 other board members into the mix, her loyal echo chamber. They stood at the edge of my driveway like a jury of self-appointed gods. One of them, a man named Phil who lived 3 houses down, squinted at the lumber pile like it was radioactive. "It could attract termites," he said gravely, as though the insects were waiting for his permission slip. "Termites don't like pressure-treated pine," I replied, still calm, still smiling. "But thanks for your concern." Karen folded her arms. "This isn't up for debate. We need your driveway cleared, and if you won't comply, we'll fine you daily." "How much?" I asked, curious. $50 a day, she announced triumphantly, as though she'd just declared martial law. "Perfect," I said, pretending to calculate in my head. "That means you'll owe me about $300 by next week." The look on her face was worth the coming headache. She sputtered, demanded to know what I meant, and I explained that since the driveway was mine, every time she trespassed on it to complain, she'd be fined at a rate of $50 a visit. Her companions chuckled, which only made her angrier. Karen didn't show up the next day, but she wasn't idle. Instead, she called the county's non-emergency number, reporting illegal storage of construction materials and unauthorized land use. By then, I'd had enough of her antics, so when the county inspector drove by in his dusty SUV, I walked out to greet him with a smile. He was a reasonable man, clipboard in hand, sunglasses reflecting the neat rows of suburban houses. He looked at my lumber, looked back at me, and said, "This is just wood." "That's what I said," I replied. He chuckled, scribbled something on his form, and told me to have a nice day. As he drove off, I noticed Karen peering from behind her curtains, her face a cocktail of disbelief and fury. For the first time, I realized she wasn't just enforcing rules for the sake of power. No, Karen was terrified of something deeper: chaos, disorder, anything she couldn't control. My lumber pile wasn't just wood to her. It was rebellion. That realization made me bolder. The next morning, I stacked an additional row of boards, still neat, still tidy, but taller, more noticeable. Karen appeared within an hour, storming across the cul-de-sac like an avenging angel. She didn't ring the bell this time. She shouted, "You're deliberately provoking me." I leaned against my truck, sipping coffee again. Me? Never. I'm just a man building a shed. Her voice cracked. You don't understand the consequences of your actions. This community relies on order. Without it, everything falls apart. People like you think they're above the rules, but we all agreed to them when we moved here. The outburst was raw, unpolished. For the first time, I saw her not as an entitled cartoon villain, but as someone desperately trying to preserve a sense of control in a world that was slipping out of her hands. That didn't make her any less insufferable, but it made her human. Karen, I said softly, you can't control everything. Sometimes a pile of wood is just a pile of wood. She shook her head, trembling with a mixture of rage and fear, and hissed, "We'll see about that." Then she marched back to her house, heels stabbing the pavement with each step. That night, I heard the sound of a printer running at full speed. By dawn, flyers were taped to every mailbox in the neighborhood. Urgent community notice. Driveway obstruction threatens safety. Each flyer bore grainy photos of my lumber, as though I were running an underground crime ring from my garage. The absurdity was too much. Neighbors started laughing. Some even came by to joke about renting space on my hazardous driveway for their kids' bikes. Karen, however, doubled down, muttering about rules and order and precedent. And then, just when I thought it couldn't escalate further, the sheriff's cruiser pulled into my driveway. Blue and white, shiny and authoritative. Karen stood across the street, arms crossed, smugness radiating off her like heat. She must have thought she'd finally won. But when the deputy stepped out, tipping his hat at me with a friendly grin, it was clear she had miscalculated. "Morning," he said. "Got a report about some obstruction here. Thought I'd come see for myself." Karen strutted over, waving her arms. "Yes, officer. This man refuses to clear his driveway. He's endangering the community and defying the HOA." The deputy looked at the lumber, then back at her. "Ma'am, I don't see a crime here." Karen's face turned crimson. "But he's violating rules." The deputy shrugged. "HOA rules aren't law. My cruiser fits just fine here, doesn't it?" He gestured, and sure enough, the patrol car sat neatly in the remaining space of my driveway, no obstruction at all. The silence that followed was glorious. I smiled, sipping my coffee, savoring the moment like a well-earned dessert. "Guess my driveway's cleared enough for the law, Karen." She opened her mouth, closed it, and stormed back across the street, her heels clattering like thunder. And just like that, the first battle was mine. After the sheriff parked his cruiser in my driveway and politely told Karen her HOA rules weren't law, I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd retreat for a while. But Karen didn't retreat. No, people like her don't lose quietly. They regroup, lick their wounds, and come back swinging twice as hard. By Monday morning, her curtains were drawn tighter than usual, and the blinds only opened in careful slits. I knew she was scheming. The first sign came when I got home from work that evening. A yellow slip was taped to my front door, bold letters screaming, "Notice of violation." It was official HOA stationery again, but the language this time was different, colder, more legalistic. Your property is in persistent non-compliance with Section 3.4.2 regarding unobstructed vehicular access. Failure to remedy this issue will result in compounded daily fines and potential legal action. At the bottom were 3 signatures, not just Karen's. Phil's scrawled name and another board member, Denise, who rarely spoke but always nodded at whatever Karen said. I peeled it off the door and laughed out loud, loud enough that Karen might have heard from across the cul-de-sac. Fines and potential legal action? Over a few planks of lumber stacked neatly against my garage? It was absurd, but also fascinating. Karen had escalated from personal outrage to collective retaliation. She was weaponizing the HOA board itself. I wasn't stupid, though. I knew HOAs thrived on intimidation. They sent letters, cited bylaws, threatened liens, all to scare people into obedience. But they relied on one thing: people folding before pushing back. I wasn't about to fold. That night, I invited my neighbor John over for a beer. John was the opposite of Karen, laid back, a retired firefighter, perpetually in shorts and flip-flops. He'd been watching the drama unfold with quiet amusement. "Got a fresh notice today," I said, handing him the paper. He read it, smirked, and shook his head. "Karen's pulling out the big guns. You know what this means, right? That I should move the wood?" I joked. "No. That she's losing. People like her only escalate when their control slips." He took a sip of beer and leaned back in the lawn chair. "Thing is, most of the neighborhood doesn't actually like her. They put up with her because she's loud. But this," he waved the notice, "this makes her look ridiculous." That gave me an idea. The next morning, I scanned the notice and posted it on the neighborhood's private Facebook group, the one Karen usually dominated with passive-aggressive posts about lawn heights and trash cans left out an extra hour. I captioned it, "Apparently my stack of lumber is such a menace to society that the HOA is threatening legal action. Should I call the National Guard before the termites invade?" Within an hour, the comments rolled in. "Are they serious? It's just wood. Karen's lost her mind. Better get Homeland Security involved." Even Phil chimed in, trying to defend the HOA with something about community standards, but he was drowned out by laughter and sarcasm. The tide had turned. Karen wasn't just fighting me anymore. She was fighting public perception. By that afternoon, Karen was back on my doorstep, this time with Denise at her side for backup. She looked rattled, her lipstick slightly smudged, her eyes sharp with fury. "You've made this into a circus," she hissed. Posting that notice online was a violation of confidentiality. The board's internal documents are not for public consumption. I raised an eyebrow. Confidentiality? It was taped to my front door. I figured if the whole street was going to see it, Facebook might as well too. Denise shifted uncomfortably, clearly realizing Karen had overplayed her hand. But Karen plowed forward. "You're undermining the authority of the HOA. That's grounds for more severe penalties." I folded my arms. "Karen, you're confusing authority with popularity. You might control the board, but the neighborhood doesn't buy it anymore." She flinched like I'd slapped her. Then she jabbed a finger at me. "This isn't over. You'll regret mocking this community." When she stormed off, I knew she'd retreat to her war room and hatch something bigger. And she did. The next week brought what I can only describe as a campaign. She printed glossy flyers with dramatic language, "Neighborhood safety at risk," and grainy, zoomed-in photos of my driveway. She claimed emergency vehicles might be unable to reach houses if obstructions, like mine, were tolerated. She shoved these flyers into every mailbox, and even tacked them to the community bulletin board by the pool. The problem for her was that people weren't buying it. My neighbor Lisa, a nurse, told me she'd driven an ambulance down our street last year and laughed at the idea of my lumber blocking anything. Others joked about staging a barbecue on my driveway just to spite her. The more she pushed, the more absurd she looked. But Karen didn't give up. She called an emergency HOA board meeting, insisting all homeowners attend. Flyers for that went out too, and curiosity got the better of everyone. On a Thursday evening, the community center filled with residents, folding chairs scraping across the floor as people settled in. Karen sat at the front table like a queen on her throne, flanked by Phil and Denise. She launched into a speech. "We are at a crossroads. Either we uphold our community's standards, or we descend into chaos. Today it's lumber, tomorrow it's junk cars, broken appliances, lawlessness." Her voice rose with each word, her eyes scanning the crowd for approval. I raised my hand. Point of order, Madam Chair. Would you care to explain how my neatly stacked wood is equivalent to lawlessness? Snickers rippled through the room. Karen's face reddened. It's about precedent, she barked. If we let one person ignore the rules, everyone will think they can. That's how communities fall apart. John stood up from the back, his arms crossed. Karen, you fined me 2 years ago for leaving my garden hose out. Did that stop the community from functioning? Or was it just you being petty? More laughter. Someone clapped. Karen tried to regain control, slamming her gavel on the table. This is not a joke. But it was too late. The crowd had turned. People started peppering her with questions about how HOA funds were being used, why fines were being issued for harmless things, and whether the board was overstepping. Denise looked like she wanted to melt into her chair. Even Phil kept glancing at the exit. By the end of the meeting, Karen was shouting just to be heard. I didn't say much more, I didn't need to. The neighborhood was doing the work for me. When the meeting finally adjourned, Karen stalked past me, whispering through clenched teeth. Enjoy your little victory. You'll regret humiliating me. Her words stuck with me, not because I was scared, but because I knew she meant them. Karen wasn't done. She'd lost the room, but she'd never stop fighting for control. And sure enough, the next morning, I woke to find an orange sticker plastered on my mailbox. Immediate compliance required. The kicker? It wasn't from the HOA. It was from the City Code Enforcement Office. That's when I realized Karen had escalated again. She'd gone outside the neighborhood, calling in real authorities this time. And for the first time, I felt the stakes shift. The orange sticker on my mailbox glared at me like a neon accusation. Immediate compliance required. It read in block letters, stamped with the City Code Enforcement logo. Unlike the HOA's bluffs and empty threats, this came with teeth. A government agency had been dragged into Karen's personal crusade, and suddenly the game had a new referee. I peeled the sticker off and studied the fine print. It cited obstruction of right-of-way and unauthorized storage of materials visible from public view. The language was vague enough to cover almost anything. My first thought was that Karen must have called in a complaint, twisting the situation until it sounded like I was running a lumberyard in my driveway. I pictured her on the phone, voice trembling with righteous urgency, spinning tales of safety hazards and disorder. An uneasy knot formed in my gut. HOA fines I could laugh at, but city violations could escalate into real penalties. Fines, court dates, maybe even liens. Karen had found a way to raise the stakes. The next morning, a white city truck pulled up. A man in khakis and a polo shirt stepped out, clipboard in hand, expression neutral. He was the kind of inspector who had seen everything and wasn't impressed by much. "You the homeowner?" he asked. "That's me," I said, staying calm. He walked over to the driveway, glanced at the stack of lumber, then at his clipboard. "Got a complaint about obstruction and unsightly storage." "Unsightly?" I asked, gesturing at the neat rows of boards stacked with military precision. I could host a Pinterest tutorial on how to stack wood. The inspector chuckled, which gave me a flicker of hope. "Doesn't look bad to me. Driveways still usable. Nothing spilling into the street." He scribbled a note. "Thing is, once a complaint's filed, I have to document it." I followed him as he took a few photos. "Let me guess," I said. "A woman named Karen made the call?" His lips twitched. "Can't disclose complainant. But yours wouldn't be the first I've heard of." That was confirmation enough. He handed me a copy of his report. "I'll mark it as compliant. You're fine for now. But if we get repeated complaints, it'll flag for further review. Just a heads up." I thanked him, and he drove off. Across the street, Karen's blinds snapped shut. She had been watching, waiting for my humiliation. Instead, she got another failure. But Karen didn't operate on logic. She operated on persistence. 2 days later, another orange sticker appeared. Same wording, same code citation. The inspector came back, this time shaking his head as he climbed out of the truck. Back again? I asked. Yup, he sighed. Same complaint. Honestly, this is getting ridiculous. We walked to the driveway. He didn't even bother taking photos this time. Look, I'm going to note this as resolved again. But if she keeps filing, it could force a supervisor review. At that point, I'll have to escalate whether I want to or not. I could see it in his eyes. He was tired of being dragged into Karen's obsession. But bureaucracy didn't care about fatigue. Rules were rules, and Karen knew how to weaponize them. That night, John came over again, beer in hand, shaking his head. She's calling in the cavalry now. What's her endgame? Control, I said. Always control. Then you need to flip it. Make her lose control. The opportunity came sooner than expected. The city scheduled a community inspection sweep, random spot checks across several neighborhoods. Karen must have thought this was her golden ticket, the moment when my lumber pile would finally be condemned. She strutted around telling anyone who'd listen that the city was finally cleaning up blight. On inspection day, 2 city trucks rolled in, multiple inspectors fanning out like soldiers. Karen hovered near the cul-de-sac entrance, clipboard in hand, pretending to be one of them. The inspectors checked my driveway, glanced at the lumber, and one of them even complimented the organization. Wish more people stacked like this, he said. They moved on to another house without issuing a single citation. Karen's face drained of color. Her grand spectacle had backfired. But I wasn't done. I had spent the previous week digging into HOA bylaws, reading every dry paragraph of fine print. And I found something, a clause about excessive complaints made in bad faith. If a homeowner or board member abused complaint procedures, the board had authority to sanction them. That evening, I posted a screenshot of the clause on the neighborhood Facebook group with a caption. Just curious, how many times does someone have to file bogus complaints before it qualifies as bad faith? The comments exploded. Neighbors shared their own stories. Karen calling code enforcement on someone's patio furniture, on kids' chalk drawings, even on a teenager's basketball hoop. People were fed up. What had been private grumbling was now public outrage. Karen responded in the comments, trying to reframe herself as the protector of the community. But the tide had shifted. For the first time, people weren't intimidated. They were laughing at her. The next HOA meeting was brutal. Residents lined up to air grievances, voices sharp with frustration. Karen tried to keep order, banging her gavel, but the sound was drowned out by accusations. Why were HOA funds being wasted on frivolous enforcement? Why was she targeting harmless neighbors while ignoring real issues like potholes and broken streetlights? Phil looked miserable, Denise avoided eye contact, and Karen was cornered. Her control was slipping. But then she pivoted. If you don't like how the board operates, run for election. Put your name on the ballot and see how hard this job really is. It was meant as a dare, a challenge she thought no one would accept. But 3 people raised their hands on the spot. John, Lisa, and another neighbor named Miguel. The room erupted in applause. Karen's face hardened. She'd been queen of the HOA for years, unopposed, unchallenged. Now her throne was under siege. After the meeting, as people filtered out, she brushed past me. Her voice was low, venomous. You've turned them against me. You think you've won. But you don't know what I'm capable of. It wasn't an idle threat. Her eyes burned with the kind of fury that doesn't fade. The next morning, I found something new in my yard. Not a notice, not a flyer. This time it was personal. Someone had dumped a pile of broken cinder blocks right in front of my lumber stack, jagged and ugly. Karen had abandoned paperwork and moved into sabotage. And that's when I realized the battle had crossed a line. This wasn't about rules anymore. It was about war. The pile of broken cinder blocks in my driveway looked like something from a demolition site. Jagged chunks of gray concrete were scattered across the gravel like a warning left by mobsters. I crouched down, picked one up, and turned it in my hand. It wasn't just dumped, it was deliberate. Whoever left this wanted me to feel their presence, their anger. And I didn't need a detective to guess who. Karen had dropped the polite mask. She'd burned through bylaws, letters, fines, city inspectors, and now she was reduced to vandalism. It was almost pitiful, except that she was escalating into something uglier. I set the block down carefully, straightened up, and saw the blinds twitch across the street. She was watching. Instead of yelling or storming over, I smiled and waved. Then I walked inside, leaving the mess in place. People like Karen fed on reactions. Deny them that, and you rob them of half their satisfaction. But I wasn't about to let it slide. That afternoon, I called the sheriff's office. The same deputy who'd parked his cruiser in my driveway weeks before. His voice was amused when I explained. Let me guess. Same neighbor as last time? Unless we've got a rogue cinder block fairy, I said. He chuckled. I'll send someone over to make a report. Even if it doesn't go anywhere, it builds a record. Trust me, that's worth more than you think. 2 hours later, his cruiser was back in my driveway. Karen must have thought she'd won some kind of twisted victory when the city inspectors came. But now she had to watch the sheriff's department log her antics into an official record. The deputy walked around, snapping photos, jotting notes. You want me to haul this stuff off? He asked. Nah, I said. I think I'll keep it. Might come in handy. He raised an eyebrow but didn't press. After he left, I stacked the blocks neatly beside the lumber, turning Karen's sabotage into just another addition to my project. By the next morning, the neighborhood Facebook group had pictures. Someone captioned them, Karen's free building supplies. The comments were merciless. That night, John came over with 2 beers and shook his head. You're turning her every move into your own joke. She must be losing her mind. She already lost it, I said. Now she's just digging deeper. And dig she did. 2 nights later, I heard the sound of tires squealing. By the time I got to the window, a car had sped off, leaving a mess of garbage bags strewn across my yard. Half-rotten leftovers, fast food wrappers, even a busted plastic chair. It was juvenile, pathetic, and it reeked. This time I didn't call the sheriff. I dragged the bags to the edge of my driveway, right beside the lumber and the cinder blocks, and arranged them into a pile. Then I posted another photo online with the caption, Karen's donation drive continues. Anyone need a broken chair? The post went viral in the neighborhood group. People started offering to bring over their own junk just to help my growing collection. One neighbor even showed up the next day with a wheelbarrow full of old bricks, dumping them with a grin. Figured you could use more supplies, he said loudly enough for Karen to hear. The street had turned against her. Every stunt she pulled became my entertainment, and everyone else's too. She wasn't the enforcer anymore. She was the clown. But Karen wasn't laughing. The next HOA meeting was chaos. Karen stormed in with a stack of printouts, photos of my driveway, screenshots of the Facebook posts, copies of city citations. She slammed them on the table, shouting about disrespect, mockery, and undermining the authority of the board. I stayed quiet until she paused for breath. Then I said, Karen, all this effort over some wood and a few rocks? Imagine if you put this energy into fixing the pool pumps or the cracked sidewalk. The neighborhood might actually thank you. Laughter rippled through the room. Karen's face went crimson. She pounded her gavel so hard it nearly snapped. You think this is funny? You think you can humiliate me? I leaned forward, voice calm. No, Karen. You're doing that all by yourself. Her rage boiled over. She stood, pointed directly at me and screamed, I'll get you out of here if it's the last thing I do. The room fell silent. That wasn't the voice of an HOA president. That was the voice of someone unhinged. Even her loyal allies looked uncomfortable. After the meeting, the deputy who'd been attending quietly in the back, apparently invited by other concerned residents, pulled me aside. She's walking a fine line. Threats like that can cross into criminal territory. Let her keep walking, I said. The farther she goes, the clearer it gets. But clarity didn't mean safety. A week later, I found deep scratches on the side of my truck. Not random scrapes, either, 3 deliberate gouges down the paint like claws. I stared at them in the morning sun, anger simmering low and steady. Property damage wasn't just a nuisance. It was a crime. I filed a report. The deputy came again, documenting everything, shaking his head. If she's behind this, she's digging herself a hole she won't crawl out of. That evening, I parked the truck right at the edge of the driveway, scratches visible to the world. And then I set up a small motion-activated camera tucked under the eaves of my garage. If Karen wanted to escalate, I'd be ready. The footage came sooner than I expected. 2 nights later, just after midnight, the camera caught movement. A figure in dark clothes creeping across my driveway, crouched low, holding what looked like a screwdriver. The face was obscured, but the silhouette, the hair, the build, was unmistakable. It was Karen. The next morning, I sent the video straight to the sheriff's office. By that afternoon, another cruiser was in my driveway. This time, the deputy wasn't just writing note. He was knocking on Karen's door. The entire street watched from windows and porches as Karen stepped outside, her voice high-pitched and indignant. She tried to wave her arms, tried to argue, but the deputy held up his phone and showed her the footage. Her expression froze. For the first time, she didn't look angry. She looked afraid. The deputy didn't arrest her on the spot, but he made it clear she was under investigation for vandalism and trespassing. He gave her a stern warning within earshot of half the neighborhood: stay off his property. Stay away from his vehicles. One more incident and we'll be talking charges. Karen stood there, trembling, her power evaporating in real time. As the cruiser drove off, John wandered over from his porch, grinning. She wanted your driveway cleared. Instead, the sheriff parked his car there again. Poetic, isn't it? I laughed, tension finally easing. But I knew better than to think it was over. People like Karen didn't stop when they lost battles. They doubled down until they destroyed themselves. And judging by the look in her eyes as she retreated into her house, Karen wasn't done. She was cornered now. And cornered people are the most dangerous of all. The war had started with lumber. Now it was about survival, hers and mine. The morning after the deputy warned Karen in front of the entire neighborhood, the street was quieter than I'd ever heard it. No barking dogs, no lawnmowers humming, no kids riding bikes. Just silence, like everyone was holding their breath. Karen's house sat across the cul-de-sac, blinds clamped shut, curtains sealed. It was the quiet of a wounded animal retreating to its den, but I knew better than to think she was done. By noon, I had my answer. A moving truck rumbled down the street, not to move her out, though I allowed myself a hopeful moment, but to unload folding chairs, a rented podium, and a giant vinyl banner that read, "Community Rights Rally." Karen had decided to take the battle beyond our HOA. She was staging a public spectacle. I stood in my driveway, sipping coffee, watching as she orchestrated the setup like a general on the battlefield. She wore a blazer instead of her usual floral dresses, her hair sprayed into an immovable helmet, her face painted with determination. She barked orders to a handful of volunteers, most of them out-of-town relatives she'd roped into her crusade. By late afternoon, a small crowd had gathered. Some curious neighbors, some strangers with clipboards, even a local reporter with a camera crew. Karen strutted to the podium, adjusted the microphone, and launched into a speech. "Our communities are under attack," she declared, voice amplified across the cul-de-sac. "People think they can defy rules, disrespect property values, and undermine the very foundation of civilized living. We will not stand by while chaos spreads through our neighborhoods." The reporter's camera zoomed in, catching every ounce of drama. Neighbors exchanged glances, some amused, others annoyed. John leaned against his mailbox, arms crossed, whispering to me, "She sounds like she's running for dictator of the county." Karen continued, raising her arms theatrically. "This is not just about one driveway. This is about the sanctity of order. If we allow obstruction, vandalism, and mockery to go unchecked, then what's next? Junkyards in our front yards? Criminals lurking behind every hedge. I nearly choked on my coffee. She was painting me as the poster boy for suburban decay, while my driveway looked like a lumberjack's Pinterest board. When she finished, she invited concerned citizens to step up and share their stories. A woman from another subdivision recounted how her neighbor left a boat parked in his yard for months. A man complained about basketball hoop. Karen nodded gravely, as though these grievances confirmed her crusade. The reporter was eating it up, but so was someone else, the sheriff's deputy. He'd pulled up quietly at the edge of the crowd, leaning against his cruiser, watching with barely disguised amusement. When Karen finally wrapped up, basking in what she thought was triumph, the reporter turned to me. "Do you have a response, sir?" As the homeowner at the center of this issue, I set my coffee down and walked to the makeshift podium. Karen stiffened, her smile freezing into a mask. The microphone squeaked as I leaned in. "My neighbor seems to believe my stack of lumber is the first step toward anarchy," I said calmly. "But let's be honest, it's wood. Neatly stacked wood. Not a junkyard, not a crime scene. Just materials for a shed. And the only chaos I see around here is someone staging political rallies in a cul-de-sac." The crowd chuckled. Even the reporter smirked. Karen lunged for the microphone, but I held it steady. "What's really at stake here isn't order. It's control. Some people think if they yell the loudest, they get to decide how everyone else lives. But this community isn't a dictatorship. We all bought our homes to live freely, not to serve as extras in someone else's drama." Applause broke out. Real applause, not the half-hearted claps Karen had coaxed from her relatives. The deputy tipped his hat at me, clearly entertained. Karen ripped the microphone from my hands, shrieking, "He's mocking the law. He's mocking all of you." But the moment was gone. The crowd was dispersing, shaking their heads, muttering about wasted time. The reporter packed up. Her rally had fizzled into a punchline. That evening, the Facebook group lit up again. Photos of the rally circulated with captions like Karen 2024, "Make driveways empty again," and "Community rights or community wrongs?" The video clip of me calmly dismantling her speech spread fast, drawing laughter from people who hadn't even attended. But Karen, humiliated on camera, didn't retreat. She regrouped again. 2 days later, I got a letter, not from the HOA, not from the city, but from a law firm. It was a cease and desist order, accusing me of defamation, harassment, and intentional emotional distress. Karen had gone legal. I showed the letter to John, who nearly spit out his beer laughing. "She actually hired a lawyer?" "Looks like it," I said. "Though I bet she found one who charges by the hour and doesn't ask too many questions." Still, I wasn't about to ignore it. I called my cousin, a lawyer in the next county, and asked for advice. He read the letter, chuckled, and said, "This thing's flimsier than wet cardboard. It's a scare tactic. If she actually files suit, it'll get tossed in 5 minutes. But if you want, I can send a little reminder about harassment laws." I liked the sound of that. By the end of the week, Karen received her own letter, this one reminding her that trespassing, vandalism, and targeted harassment could result in criminal charges, and that any lawsuit she filed would open her up to counterclaims. The neighborhood grapevine reported she tore it up on her front lawn, screaming loud enough for the whole block to hear. But the legal scare seemed to push her over the edge. That weekend, I noticed unfamiliar cars parked near her house. Men in suits, briefcases in hand, going in and out like it was a campaign headquarters. Rumors spread quickly. Karen was trying to rally other HOAs in nearby subdivisions, forming some kind of coalition for order. And then came the real shock. A flyer slid under every door in our neighborhood. Emergency HOA conference, special guest speakers. At the bottom, in bold letters, Sheriff's Office representative will address community concerns. That was news to me, and apparently also to the sheriff's office. When I called the deputy to ask, he groaned. She's been blowing up our phones for weeks. My boss finally agreed to send someone just to shut her up. But trust me, they're not coming to support her. The conference was held in the community center. Karen had decorated the place like a political rally, balloons, banners, even a table of pastries. She strutted to the microphone, introduced herself as acting voice of the coalition, and launched into yet another tirade about order, rules, and the existential threat of L. Burr Piles. And then the sheriff himself walked in. Not a deputy this time. The sheriff. A tall man with a commanding presence, badge gleaming, boots echoing on the tile floor. The room fell silent. Karen beamed, certain she had summoned her savior. The sheriff waited until she finished her speech, then took the microphone. His voice was calm, steady, but carried weight. Folks, I'm here because we've received a flood of complaints from this neighborhood. After thorough investigation, let me be clear. These complaints are baseless. Law enforcement is not your tool for settling personal grudges. Our deputies' time is better spent protecting this county from real crime, not refereeing HOA disputes. The silence was electric. Karen's smile faltered, her face draining of color. The sheriff continued. And let me add this. Repeated false reports waste taxpayer resources. If this behavior continues, we will pursue charges against the complainant. He didn't name her. He didn't have to. Every eye in the room turned toward Karen. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. For the first time since this all began, she had no words. The sheriff handed the microphone back, tipped his hat, and walked out. His cruiser rumbled to life outside, parked once again in the same driveway Karen had tried so hard to clear. And in that moment, the entire neighborhood knew the war had shifted. Karen wasn't just losing battles. She was losing the war. After the sheriff's speech at the community center, the entire neighborhood felt different. People walked their dogs past my driveway without side eyes, kids rode their bikes in circles around the lumber pile like it was some kind of landmark, and John joked about giving tours of the monument to Karen's downfall. For once, it seemed like her stranglehold on the community had finally loosened. But quiet rarely lasts when someone like Karen is involved. She wasn't built to fade into the background. She thrived on control, on attention, on making everyone else bend to her will. Losing publicly wasn't just humiliating, it was existential. And desperation makes people reckless. The first signs of her unraveling were small. She stopped posting in the neighborhood Facebook group, where she'd once lectured everyone about hedge heights and trash can placement. She skipped her morning power walks, those clacking heel patrols that always seemed timed to catch someone breaking an imaginary rule. But while the silence was noticeable, it wasn't restful. It was the quiet of a brewing storm. One night, around 11 p.m., I heard the sound of footsteps outside. I checked the camera feed on my phone and saw Karen creeping along the edge of my driveway, flashlight in hand, snapping photos like some undercover detective. She wasn't vandalizing this time, she was documenting. Every angle of the lumber, the cinder blocks, even my truck with its scratches. She paced back and forth, muttering, scribbling in a notebook. The next morning, every mailbox on the street had a stapled packet, emergency dossier on driveway safety violations. 30 pages of grainy photos, city codes taken out of context, and handwritten notes like, possible pest infestation? And obstruction angle 47 degrees. People laughed at first, but laughter turned to irritation. Lisa, the nurse, stormed down the street holding the packet like it was contaminated. "This is harassment," she said. "She's wasting everyone's time with this garbage." Others agreed. Neighbors who had once quietly tolerated Karen were openly fed up. At the next HOA meeting, turnout was higher than I'd ever seen. People weren't there to listen, they were there to rebel. Karen strutted in late, clutching her binder of dossiers, and tried to launch into her usual tirade. But before she could get more than a sentence out, John raised his hand. "Madam President," he said loudly, "we've had enough. This is no longer about driveways or wood or whatever other nonsense you've cooked up. This is about your abuse of power. And we're done." The room erupted in applause. Karen pounded her gavel, shouting for order, but no one listened. Someone shouted, "Resign!" and the chant caught on. "Resign! Resign!" Her face was a mask of rage and disbelief. "You can't force me out. I was elected," she screeched. Lisa stood up. "Fine. Then we'll vote you out." The bylaws allowed for special elections if enough homeowners demanded it, and right then, signatures were gathered. By the end of the night, Karen's presidency was effectively over. She left the meeting shaking, muttering to herself, eyes darting like a cornered animal. That was when I realized, she wasn't just losing power. She was losing her identity. Without the HOA presidency, Karen wasn't Karen. She was just another neighbor in a house like everyone else, and that thought must have terrified her. The very next day, her retaliation came. At dawn, I walked outside to find spray paint across my garage door. Big, sloppy red letters, "Rule Breaker." My stomach tightened, not from the insult but from the sheer desperation behind it. This wasn't a battle tactic, it was a tantrum. I didn't clean it right away. Instead, I left it up for everyone to see. Neighbors walked by, shook their heads, muttered under their breath. Some took photos. By noon, another sheriff's cruiser was parked in my driveway, lights flashing for emphasis as the deputy documented the vandalism. Karen stood on her porch, arms crossed, lips thin. She didn't even try to hide this time. Everyone knew who had done it. But knowing and proving are two different things, and she still clung to that sliver of deniability. That evening, John knocked on my door. "She's coming apart at the seams. It's only a matter of time before she crosses a line she can't wriggle out of." He wasn't wrong. 3 nights later, the line was crossed. Around midnight, my motion camera went off again. I pulled up the feed and froze. Karen wasn't alone this time. She'd brought 2 men with her. Relatives, maybe, or friends dumb enough to get dragged into her crusade. They were hauling chains, hooks, and a winch. And they weren't here to spray paint or dump trash. They were here to move the lumber. I slipped out quietly and called the sheriff from the shadows of my porch. By the time the trio had hooked the first chain around the stack of boards, headlights lit up the street. 2 cruisers rolled in, sirens blipping once, loud enough to make the men freeze. "Step away from the property," a deputy shouted. Karen shrieked, "This is community enforcement. He's in violation. We're acting within our rights." The deputies weren't buying it. They separated the men, cuffed one who resisted, and pulled Karen aside. I couldn't hear everything, but I caught enough: criminal trespass, destruction of property, interference with private ownership. The entire neighborhood had gathered by then, drawn out by the flashing lights. People whispered, pointed, recorded on their phones. Karen's reputation wasn't just tarnished, it was obliterated. When the deputies finally loaded her into the back of a cruiser, not under arrest but for questioning, a cheer went up. Neighbors clapped, some even whistled. John leaned toward me, muttering, "Looks like your driveway just became ground zero for justice." Karen was released the next morning, but the damage was irreversible. The sheriff's office had a thick file on her now, and the neighborhood had footage of her midnight raid. She tried to spin it, claiming she was restoring order on behalf of the community, but no one bought it. And yet, even cornered, she didn't stop. She doubled down again. The following week, letters started arriving from a new source, the Coalition for Neighborhood Standards. Clearly her invention, but now she was pretending it was a county-wide movement. The letters accused me of corrupting community values and threatened to escalate to higher authorities. But the higher authority had already spoken. When I showed one to the deputy, he laughed so hard he nearly dropped his coffee. "She's trying to invent her own government now," he said. The neighbors weren't intimidated either. In fact, they started mocking her by holding their own coalition events. A potluck dinner on John's lawn, A kids' bike parade with signs that said things like Coalition for Ice Cream Rights. Every joke chipped away at her dwindling influence. Karen's house became a fortress. Curtains drawn, lights off at odd hours, visitors arriving in secret. Rumors spread. She was lawyering up again, she was planning to sue the HOA itself, she was plotting something bigger. But the truth was simpler, she was unraveling. The woman who once ruled the neighborhood with fear was now a punchline, a cautionary tale whispered about at backyard barbecues. And though I should have felt triumphant, I felt something else instead. Pity. Because Karen wasn't just losing a fight. She was losing herself. The final unraveling began on a Sunday morning, the kind of morning that usually hummed with sprinklers and leaf blowers and the smell of bacon drifting from kitchens. Instead, the neighborhood was dead quiet, every eye peeking through blinds at Karen's house. Rumors had swirled all week. She was planning something big, a last stand against the forces that had humiliated her. Nobody knew what form it would take, but everyone knew she wouldn't go quietly. I found out the answer when I stepped outside to grab the paper. Parked squarely in front of my driveway was Karen's car. Not across the street. Not at an angle. Dead center, nose to garage door like a barricade. She'd blocked me in. I stood there in my robe, coffee in hand, staring at the absurdity. Across the cul-de-sac, her curtains shifted. She was watching, daring me to react. Of course, I muttered. The nuclear option. Kindergarten parking games. Neighbors began to drift out of their houses, drawn by the spectacle. Phones came out. John crossed the street with his mug of coffee and said loud enough for Karen to hear, "Guess she's declaring martial law now." I considered calling a tow truck, but something told me Karen wanted that. She wanted a showdown, flashing lights, another stage to play her role as martyr. And then, right on cue, she stormed out of her house, keys jangling like weapons. "You are officially in violation," she shouted, her voice cracking. "Your driveway is hereby seized until further notice. You cannot continue to mock this community." The laughter that rippled through the crowd was sharp, but her eyes were wild, her hands trembling. She wasn't playing a role anymore. She was desperate, cornered, unraveling in public. "Karen," I said calmly, "move your car before you regret this." She threw her head back and laughed, high-pitched, brittle. "You think the sheriff will save you? He won't. No one will. I am the rules here." It was the line that broke her. Everyone heard it. Everyone recorded it. And right then, as though summoned by fate, the familiar rumble of a sheriff's cruiser rolled down the street. The deputy who stepped out wasn't the usual one. This time it was the sheriff himself again, hat low, expression unreadable. He walked slowly, deliberately, surveying the scene. Karen's car in my driveway, the gathered crowd, the phones raised high. Karen straightened, plastering on a smile. "Sheriff, thank goodness you're here. This man has—" He held up a hand. "Ma'am, stop. Right now." His voice cut like a blade. She froze, mouth open, caught mid-performance. The sheriff pointed at her car. "Move it. Immediately." Karen blinked. "But he's violating." "Ma'am." The sheriff's tone left no room for argument. "Your vehicle is illegally blocking private property. That's trespassing and obstruction. You have 60 seconds to move it, or I'll have it towed. And you will face charges." The silence was electric. Karen looked around, searching for support, but none came. Phones stayed raised. Neighbors stared. No one moved to help her. Her face crumpled. She stomped back to her car, fumbling with the keys, muttering under her breath. She reversed too fast, tires screeching, nearly clipping the curb. When she finally parked in her own driveway, she sat behind the wheel, hands gripping it like she was trying to strangle the leather. The sheriff turned to me. "You want to press charges?" I hesitated, feeling the weight of the moment. This was the kill shot. I could have her hauled in, booked, dragged through the system. But as I looked at her, slumped and broken in her driver's seat, I realized I didn't need to. She was already finished. "Not today," I said. "Just make sure the record shows what happened." The sheriff nodded. It does. Loud and clear. He tipped his hat, got back in the cruiser, and drove off. The crowd slowly dispersed, murmuring, shaking their heads, some laughing softly. Karen stayed in her car for nearly an hour before finally slinking inside her house. That should have been the end. But Karen had one last gasp in her. 2 nights later, I woke to the sound of engines. I looked out the window and saw a flatbed truck backing into my driveway. On it was a small bulldozer, chains rattling as it was unloaded. And there was Karen, in pajamas and slippers, shouting instructions to the 2 men operating it. My heart jumped. She wasn't blocking, she wasn't spray painting, she was about to demolish the lumber itself. I grabbed my phone and hit record, calling the sheriff with my free hand. By the time I reached the porch, the bulldozer's engine was roaring, its blade lowering toward the wood. "Karen!" I shouted. "You're insane!" She turned, eyes wild, hair a mess, voice shrieking over the noise. "If I can't win, I'll destroy it all." The neighbors were already pouring out of their houses, filming, gasping. John yelled, "She's lost it completely." And then, like a divine punchline, the sheriff's cruiser appeared again, lights flashing. 2 more followed. The bulldozer screeched to a halt as deputies leapt out, guns drawn, not aimed to fire, but to stop chaos. "Shut it down," one shouted. The operators froze, hands in the air. Deputies swarmed, yanking keys, cuffing the men. Karen shrieked, lunging toward the lumber, but 2 deputies intercepted her, pulling her back as she kicked and screamed. "You don't understand," she wailed. "He's the criminal. He's the one ruining everything. I'm saving this community." Her words dissolved into incoherent sobs as they guided her to the cruiser. She wasn't handcuffed, yet, but the message was clear. The sheriff himself approached me, shaking his head. "Well, I guess you were right. She really is done." I looked at Karen, collapsed in the back seat of the cruiser, eyes red, mascara streaking. She wasn't the tyrant anymore. She wasn't even the villain. She was just broken. The next morning, word spread fast. The HOA board formally stripped her of all authority. Her allies resigned. Her house went up for sale within a month, and when the moving truck finally pulled away, the neighborhood gathered in John's yard for a cookout. There was laughter, beer, kids running wild. For the first time in years, the cul-de-sac felt like a community instead of a dictatorship. As for me, I built the shed. Lumber, cinder blocks, even the old broken chair from her trash donation. Every piece of her sabotage became part of it. I hung a sign above the door, "Karen's Legacy." Neighbors loved it. Some even asked to borrow tools just for the excuse of stepping inside. One evening, John raised a toast in my backyard. "To the driveway that broke a tyrant," he said. Everyone laughed and clinked glasses. And I realized he was right. It wasn't just a pile of wood. It was a line in the sand. A refusal to bow. A reminder that sometimes the smallest acts of defiance, a stack of lumber, a sarcastic smile, a refusal to move, are enough to topple the loudest bully. Karen had demanded my driveway be cleared. Instead, the sheriff had parked his cruiser there, the neighborhood had rallied, and her empire had crumbled. In the end, all that was left was a story, and the memory of a woman who tried to rule with fear, only to be undone by her own desperation. And every time I pulled into my driveway, past the shed built from the chaos she created, I smiled. Because I hadn't just kept my driveway. I'd won it forever.